Hello, everyone. First, want to start off and just say thank you to Maxon for having me out here. I'm really looking forward to showing you guys this. So what am I showing you? Actually, before we do that, let's take actually a look at my reel here, and it'll kind of give you a little bit of breakdown. If you're not familiar with my work, I go as Locked in Loading. My name's David Brodeur, and let's just check it out. Cool. Sweet. So, yeah, thank you. If you're not familiar with me at all, I also have done some training and tutorials on Grayscale Gorilla. You might know me from there. You might know me from Locked in Loading. I'm also a teacher at the Motion Design Department at Maryland College of Art and Design. I teach 3D animation there as well. All right, so let's go through what I'm doing with you guys today. So I'm going to show you how I do my rocks and terrain. So if you're familiar with my work at all, I do a lot of like these close-up studies of terrain and like a macro study, and it's alien planets. It's usually a little weird, usually a little gross if you see my personal work. And I get a ton of questions about how I make this. And so it's a long overdue tutorial here, a breakdown of how I actually make that stuff. So if we kind of just slide through, this is kind of what we're going to make. I'm going to kind of show and demonstrate specifically on those ground materials, and we're going to go and break that down. My favorite part about it is it's not really all that complicated, right? It's just kind of a skill and a certain technique I've developed by just doing it over and over and over again. So this is kind of how I break it down. I say time plus repetition equals growth. I didn't want to say time plus repetition equals success, because you can do things numerous times and have lots of failures, and that in return makes you grow. It's not necessarily a successful end piece. So I have a lot of people that I show how to do this, and they come back and they're like, mine doesn't look like yours. How come? And I'm like, well, you did the same thing that I'm doing, except this is the first day I tried this technique, and this is day 1, February 2nd, 2016. All right. I did this almost every single day, maybe excluding a couple weekend days, maybe, for 383 days straight. And then I came up with this. There is really no difference in the technique with these two. This is the only difference. It's the number of days that I did it over and over and over again, and would tweak things and just keep figuring stuff out and defining how the lighting looks better, camera and focal length and stuff like that. And then we got here. So today we're going to go through how to make this in the physical render. Then we're going to go through and we're going to start adding more layers and use Octane Render. And we're going to use a sculpting engine inside of Cinema4D as well, because I noticed as I wanted things to become more photorealistic, I needed to start layering things up. I needed additional rocks, additional stones, right? And these are all those things that that we're going to kind of evolve to here through today. So let's do this. Jump right into Cinema4D. So like I said, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start off in the physical render. You're going to see how easy this really is when we start breaking it down, in theory at least. So we start off with just a simple plane, and this is really where most people make their first mistake. This is boring. This is so boring. We don't just want to make a material and drop the material on this plane, right? What we want to do is make this plane be interesting already. So we're going to just use some simple deformers. I'm going to grab the Displacer Deformer here, and I'm going to throw just a simple noise shader on that. All right. Nothing fancy yet, right? But let's get an interesting surface to start off with. So I'm going to make a couple of these. So I'm going to just start relabeling this. I'm going to just call this large displace. Oh, cap locks must be on. And I'm going to go into this noise material itself. And I don't want to try to get the finite detail, the granular level detail with the actual geometry. I want to do that with the texture, but I do want to break up some of the geometry and give it some larger scale noise in here. So I'm going to increase this global scale from 100 to 1000. And I'm going to jump back into the actual object here, and I'm going to increase this height. I don't have these set numbers yet. We're probably going to go in here and redefine this. Once we get the camera locked in, we might want to raise that geometry and raise that ground up a bit. So this is the first set of displacement that we're going to have, right? And we're going to be getting kind of deep down in there. But like I said, we're going to have more than just one displacement. So we're going to try to have 2 levels, and that's really what I'm working at right now. I want to have this larger deformation here, and then I want to have a medium deformation, and then the small details are going to come from displacements and the material itself. So I'm going to jump into the shading on this guy. And this is where, when you guys make it, I'll like go in here and play with all the different noise channels, right? See what they do. You're going to get a different look each time, and you don't want, if you do this numerous times, you don't want it to always look the same, right? And so this is where you're going to find that kind of variation. I don't really know which one I'm going to pick yet. Let's just go with a turbulence, whatever. And I'm going to go in this turbulence now, and in this material still, in the shader here. I'm going to reduce the overall global scale to this. I'm going to say for this one, let's make it 200. Now, obviously, we need more segments in here. So instead of adding them in here, which we could, right? We could, well, not that much. Let's just say, what if we did 200 by 200? Okay. This is not really the look that I'm going to have drive it. Remember, I don't really want the detail coming from the actual geometry itself. I just kind of want this to be rough. So I'm going to just reduce this 100 by 100. And I'm going to throw on a subdivision surface here. I'm going to drop that in. And I'm going to take these subdivisions down. And I'm going to start looking at, I'm going to relabel this too. Let's call this small displace. And for this one, let's tone down the setting a little bit. Let's maybe make this like 20 here or something. We're going to keep reducing this. I still don't want maybe that much bump out of this guy. Maybe I'll do something like 10. Okay, cool. So you can see we're starting to get some sort of interesting geometry out from this now. I'm going to add a camera just so we're starting to lock in to where we actually want to look. You'll notice that in a lot of my work, I've kind of found that I really like these high ridges. And these are kind of the areas that I specifically like to place the camera towards to get my like main focus point, right? And I put like, you know, whatever subject matter. It's usually some kind of weird alien, slimy looking, disgusting thing, right? And so I kind of want to pick my focus here. Before that, though, I also want to change the focal length. You probably have heard this before. You might have heard other artists even today or this week. They're going to be talking about the focal length. Please do not just use the default focal length, because this is an actual artistic choice, right? When you pick up a camera, you don't just go with whatever's attached to it, right? Like, not if you're a serious artist, right? That is an artistic option that you have, and it determines what that final image looks like. The same goes for 3D. So I've noticed just through trial and error that for me, like a telephoto lens works really well. It kind of really just compresses the scene, and it really gives this nice alien-looking kind of terrain world, whatever, right? And you'll notice as we start doing the texturing, it will look bad. It's not going to look great. And then when we start adding our lights in, that's going to give really nice contrast and all the different grooves and pockets in the rock and the terrain. And then and then we'll add depth of field, and that is going to save us. The depth of field breaks up this like kind of visual repetition that happens from this texture. So let's just start making the texture here. So I'm going to locate my folder here, and I'm going to discuss a little bit about the textures in which I'm using for this. So you'll see I got physical render textures. So if you guys have used any online resources for getting your textures, things like Polygon, textures.com, or Quixel Megascans. You'll probably notice when you download a material, you download it and it gives you this entire list of like, displacement, normal, bump, reflection, specular, right? And it gives you this whole entire package. What I actually do for making my ground materials is I mix and match these. So you'll see right here, these two have the same kind of file name because they are from that same download. And then the actual texture that I'm going for in the diffuse channel is something completely different. I'm mixing and matching these two packages together. And that's how I started breaking apart and getting more interesting macro detail. If you want like a further distance shot away, I'll pull it up here, right? This is something I did for Audi. And the same techniques that we're going to do today are the same techniques I did for this, but I didn't mix the materials like I'm going to do today. So this one, the ground material here was just the straight channels that you would download with the diffuse, reflection, refractions, all that stuff, the bumps and normals. But when I do the macro ones, I like to mix them up. And you'll see that I don't keep them all at the same 100% scale. And then this is another thing that I did. And the same techniques I used to create the sand here is exactly what we're going to do today. So you don't just have to take away that, oh, okay, now I'm going to learn how to do alien rocks and whatever, macro study of rocks. The techniques are going to apply across many different looks. It's the same exact steps. So, and towards the end, when we get into the Octane Render, you're going to see really easily how I went about making this. All right, so let's import some of these textures here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import this into our color, into our diffuse. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I'm going to grab a normal, turn that on, come in here, grab the normal channel, and I'm going to also throw in the displacement. So in the displacement, import that in. And we're going to eventually check on the subpolygon displacement here, but just going to drag and drop this material onto our plane. And let's throw the interactive render region on. You can see this is not quite there yet. This is not exactly what we want. Okay, so this is the kind of detail that we want out of there. And as you can see inside of Cinema right now, we are not getting that kind of detail. It's not there yet. Well, one, we don't have any lighting in. Remember I said that's going to make a big difference. Two, the camera and the depth of field is going to make a big difference. But three, we haven't even kind of finessed and massaged this material enough. So I really like breaking these up. Right now, each one of these materials that I have are all at 100% scale. And for the displacement, we'll do the same thing when we jump to Octane. I like to change the scale of the displacement material and kind of reduce it. So I'm going to throw this into a layer. And in here, I'm just going to add an effect, transform. And I don't know exactly what scale I want this to be yet. I kind of try to clear my head every time I do these. That way I kind of make them slightly different each time. And let's go into the displacement, check on subpolygon displacement, and we should see increase this. Let's increase it to like 40. Okay, so we need to throw some lights in there because we don't even know what we're looking at right now, right? It's just kind of a visual mess. So if I go and I'm going to keep the lighting pretty simple. Let's just throw on an infinite light, and I'm going to see if I can get just a nice little extreme angle here to our lighting. Something downward. Now that's just going to really help give us like really nice kind of shadows and different looks like that. So I'm really just trying to get where the camera is right now. I'm going to throw a sphere in the scene. I'm going to use this as my focal object, and I'm going to drop this into the camera. So this is not going to be something that we're going to actually be lighting. It's really just something so I can easily pick a focus point. And I'm going to get my camera here and drag and drop that sphere into it. I'm going to hide the visibility of that because, like I said, I just want it to be able to see the focus object. Let's go into our render settings. I'm going to change this from standard to physical. And in the physical setting here, I'm going to change it to from adaptive to progressive. When I'm just kind of doing look development and things like that, the progressive works super quick. As you guys know, it works based on scan lines, so you can see a result very quickly. So anytime you're doing texturing and lighting, it's a really nice way to start out. I don't use my final renders for progressive, but for this, it will work just perfect. And I'm going to check on depth of field. Let's just expand this window up. And in the camera now, I got to go into the physical, and I got to change the f-stop. I'm going to drop it down really low for now, and I'm going to just start centralizing that. But already, just by adding that depth of field, I mean, let's bring this back up to 8, just so we can look at how crappy it looked before, right? Doesn't really show us anything, but now that we're starting to kind of solo out a specific section and show the viewer where we want their eyes to go to, we actually have that focus point. Now, I'm not happy with the displacement quite yet. I think it's a little bit extreme, so maybe I'm going to change the height to like 25. Like I said, we're going to be kind of jumping back and forth in and out of these material settings because we kind of want it to be nice and custom. This is really kind of getting there. I think I would personally like to have this detail even smaller. So I'm going to go into the layer, and I'm going to change this scale from 0.5 to 0.3. Let's just see what that looks like now. Right, it's kind of getting a little bit more granular, and I'm going to go back into my displacement and reduce the height, maybe back down to 20. And so I really want to get just that like kind of small touch of noise in there. All right, so this is probably as far as I'm going to take the physical render, because then we're going to get into the next step of we're going to go into sculpting inside of Cinema 4D. I love the sculpting engine inside of Cinema 4D. I use it in almost every project since it has come out. It is fantastic. Say file, new window. And if you guys haven't used the sculpting engine, before I even get into the sculpting engine, I'm going to just model roughly what I want some of my rocks to look like. And in this, all these extra rocks that we see on top of the ground surface like we just made, those were all sculpted and then cloned or scattered across the geometry. Prior to R20, this would have been kind of hard to do in Cinema 4D with how many clones I do put in here sometimes. But now R20 has the multi-instance feature, which is just like the Octane scatter feature if you're familiar with Octane. So you can do it very easily without having to use a third-party renderer, which is fantastic. But today I'm going to show you with Octane, because I didn't have access to R20 before this. So now we're going to start sculpting these rocks. And I'm going to show you a couple techniques that I've kind of developed to make rocks and prep them for sculpting. If you haven't used sculpting, this might be a nice little run-through for you. So I'm going to go out and go into my modeling layout. And I'm going to go into my edge tool here, my edge mode. And I'm going to just cut up this rock a little bit here, or this cube. Right? And we're first going to make this, it's going to be very geometric based. But before I go into sculpting, I like to get just the loose, rough geometry before I start adding in the detail and making it look more like a rock. So now I'm going to go into the polygon face tool here, and I'm going to just start pushing and pulling some sides out. Bear with me. It's not going to look great, but it will once we're done sculpting it here. And so I just really want to get a little bit of variation. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's really just kind of a trial and error thing. Once you do it a bunch of times, you'll see it starts to make more and more sense. Okay, cool. This is my rock. That's it, guys. No, we're going to sculpt this. Let's jump into the sculpting tool now. And now we're definitely going to get a lot more subdivisions in here, but that's okay. So I'm going to add some subdivisions. I usually use a Wacom for sculpting. It's just a lot more fluid, so bear with me. I might be a little rough using a mouse here, but it'll turn out just fine. Actually, before I get to this point, I'm going to get the grab tool, and I'm just going to try to break up some of this very flat geometry. That's not going to give us a very organic look to it. So I'm just going to simply come through here and start pulling some of these faces out a little bit, pull this face out, right? Just break this up a touch and do it to this side. All right, very cool. And then I'll get the smooth tool, and I'll kind of do the same thing with the smooth tool. I'm not really going through many of the details here in sculpting, so if you're unfamiliar with it, you'll have to just try hard to keep up, because I'm just going to kind of go through this. There's a lot of tutorials out there and training out there already that kind of just go through the basics of what these sculpt tools do. So I would recommend you check those out. So I'm just coming through here, and I'm just kind of, you can see I'm hitting up these harsh corners. I don't want those. I want kind of more seamless blends between them. Okay, still not a rock, right? Still very kind of ugly. You're like, very cool, Dave, this sucks. So the next part, I'm going to add another layer of the subdivisions here. and I'm going to get the flatten tool. And with this flatten tool, I kind of try to like make my rocks, before I get the detail in there, I kind of like to make it so they have very like sharp, like chipped edges, like, almost as if it was like chiseled off a bigger rock. And this is just, again, a technique that I've come up after doing this numerous times over and over again on how I feel like I've gotten my most realistic looking rocks. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to just keep changing my brush size, but you'll see, very, very simple. I'm just going to flatten out certain edges, right? Very kind of chiseled, very faceted looking piece of geometry is what we're going to end up getting here. Flatten these areas out, right? So we're not really sure what kind of rock this is yet, but I can't wait to show you a couple very underutilized aspects of Cinema 4D here in just a moment. So once I'm happy with this, let's reduce this brush size, get a little smaller faceted pieces. Cool, right? And when I zoom out, you'll see it kind of has somewhat of a shape of like some chiseled rock. It'll be rough though, and that's fine. You'll see how it starts to come to life in a moment. Okay, let's just zoom out of here. Okay, so not really what you would think a rock would look like, but maybe your imagination can start kind of breaking it down. And now this is where the real fun comes in. I'm going to go into the pool object, and this is what I find to be a very underutilized aspect of Cinema 4D. If you sculpt, you probably know about it. If you don't sculpt, I'm sure you don't know about it, but it can be very helpful regardless. So if you go into the content browser, into the presets, and if we go into the sculpting brush presets here, and go into there, right? There's a whole list of different brushes, and we're going to go into, I actually will digress for a second. Let's just go into the cracks. This is something that most people don't know. And this has nothing to do with my project, by the way, this moment right here. If I double click on that actual textures folder, if you have Cinema 4D, you have access to all of these seamless textures. If you double click on these now within that texture folder, it's going to bring it up to the picture viewer, and you can save these out. And so I've done this in a lot of different my projects as well, where you'll have nice custom displacement textures right out of Cinema 4D, and you can import those right back in. Really kind of helpful. So you can do that with all of them. Okay, back to my lesson. I'm going to scroll down here and go into the stone folder. And if you double click on any of these guys, they're going to automatically be applied to the pool object itself. So I'm just going to go in here and find one. I kind of vary them up a little bit. I wouldn't say I have one that's necessarily my go-to. I'm going to just click this, let's click this stone 9, whatever. And you might think that, I'm going to undo that. You might think I'm coming in here to add this level of detail. I'm not. This is not what I'm going for. I don't want to get, again, that finite detail with my geometry. I want to get that with my textures. But I do want to break up this very geometric, chiseled thing that is happening here and make it feel more organic, feel like it was weathered or worn away, eroded, right? And so if I increase the size, this is something else I've kind of figured out. For me, working at this scale, if I increase the size somewhere between 200 to 300% here, and I'm going to increase the pressure just so I don't have to click as much, you see I have a rather large brush. But watch what starts happening when I start clicking this, right? I'm just clicking over and over and over again. I start to break this up. And so I'm just going to kind of move around and do this through all the geometry. And you'll see it takes these very straight lines and just starts manipulating them and bending them and distorting them ever so little. And if I find a point, you'll see we can start to push and pull individual aspects of this rock more and more. And this is kind of something I just discovered. As like I said, I've done these over and over and over and over again. And you might want to change your brush scale down a little bit, but I've noticed kind of the larger that you can do, the better, and it's just multiple clicks. If you don't want to click so many times, you can increase the actual pressure, and that will start distorting it a little bit faster, right? Come up here, maybe pull some of this stuff. What's really nice now is if we look at this, right, we're getting something that now feels much more like this kind of organic rock boulder thing. And then once we apply these textures, it's really going to start to pop. Now, I didn't come in here and like literally make with the pool brush some of these small little details that we're seeing in there, right? Like these small little details, that's just happening because I'm using the pool and using this texture, and I'm allowing it to do the work for me. So now we've got our rock texture. I'm just going to save this out just in case, we got to restart the machine or something like that. And I'm going to go back in to my other scene here. And we're going to just seamlessly kind of, I'm going to delete this light. We're going to start to transform this scene now into the Octane Render scene. And I'm going to go back into my standard layout. And I don't need this material anymore because we're going to rebuild this material. You guys are going to see how simple this is to use. I'm going to actually approach the material in Octane a little bit different, and you could do it the same way as I did in the Cinema Physical Render, but I think I want to show you guys more than just one way of kind of doing it. So I'm going to use an Octane glossy material, and I'm going to open up the node editor. If you're familiar with Octane, it has the ability to make materials just like Cinema 4D has been always in this kind of folder hierarchy. And if you're more familiar with nodes, you also have the option to do it via node-based. So I usually gravitate any more and more towards the node-based, which is fantastic that R20 now has the node-based material settings in there. If you haven't seen it, it was amazing. Chad actually did a little presentation on it this morning. And so I'm going to open up the node editor here, and I'm going to drag and drop an image texture node, and I'm going to import a couple extra texture scene files that we have. I'm going to go my 3D, my source images, and the Octane render. And let's just take a look at these first here. So this is kind of more of that stereotypical download that you would get from Polygon or Textures.com and all that, right? This is the complete list. All these are together. So if I were to just use these as they are as default, I would probably get a pretty nice, realistic rock material from, you know, a human's vantage point. But it wouldn't really give me a good vantage point on a macro level. Let's go through. I'll demonstrate that. And then I'll show you how to get now that macro look out of those same materials. So I'm going to connect this, and I'm going to just kind of duplicate this down. And I'm going to bring in the specular material. And I'm going to repeat this process for each one of these that I want, right? If you guys have used these materials like this before, this is a pretty common setup. Bring the roughness in. We probably don't need all these for this, but I have them here, so we're going to use them. All right, let's do the bump now. We'll have bump, normal, and then the displacement, and then that would be it. And then I'm going to show you how to start breaking these up so we can get something a little bit more interesting than just the default visual that most people are going to get from it, because most people aren't going to start actually breaking this up. So here's our normal, and then our last one is our displacement. And this displacement is the one that we're going to probably be tweaking the most here as far as the scale. If you remember in the beginning, I mentioned that I don't necessarily like to keep all these textures at 100% scale, not for the macro level. For now, I'm just going to connect this default, though, right, just as you would normally. And I have no idea what amount that we're going to have this or what we're not. Let's just close out of this for a second. And I'm going to refresh this material so it shows up down here. And I'm going to simply just drag and drop this onto our plane object here. And let's just render this out real quick. And let's see what we're working with. So this looks awful, right? Does not look good at all. We're going to take these same exact materials that don't look good right now and make them look good by breaking stuff up a little bit. If I zoom out, though, let's see. If I zoom out, okay, that doesn't look half bad, right? It's like, okay, yeah, that works, right? And so that's where these textures kind of shine at, is at this kind of vantage point. But if you really want to get up close on them, they kind of fall apart and they don't really work. So we're going to zoom back in here. We're going to set our camera up how we want it. Remember, I like using these kind of high ridges and things like that. So this will be kind of the ridge that we're going to focus on. I'm going to turn this camera into an Octane camera here just by simply throwing that tag on. And I'm going to make a quick little focus here. So I'm going to go in, uncheck the autofocus, and I am going to increase my aperture. And let's just pick a certain area. Okay, so I'm still not happy with this, but this is okay right now. And I'm going to add in a light. So let's go into our objects, and I'm going to just do a simple daylight rig. When I do this, I really like mixing and matching. I'll throw an HDRI in here as well. And then when I have objects in the scene, what I really like doing is adding specific area lights for those specific objects to get just more accurate lighting. I never just use like the daylight or the infinite light by themselves. You always want to use an additional light to help kind of bounce light or fill in some spaces. So let's just change the time so we get some lighting that's a little bit more direct. Enable this. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change the north offset. And you're going to see that we're going to start making this a little more interesting. Now, remember, I still am not happy with this. Actually, I hate this, right? I don't think this looks good. It looks good when we zoom out, possibly, right? At this level, that's very nice. But when we get into the macro, and that's where I really want to show you guys how to kind of start breaking this up. We're going to open up our material settings here, and I'm going to talk briefly about the actual diffuse layer itself. I'm going to throw a color correction node on this. And with this color correction node, for me, this kind of brown warm tone takes it out from this rock like area that I want it to be in. So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to decrease the saturation to maybe like something like 0.5 for now. And I actually want it to be a little bit deeper and darker. So I'm going to increase this gamma maybe to like 1.5. I'm not sure. We'll hop back in there and play with that a little bit. And then the displacement material here, I really want to change this. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add a transform node and plug that in. And I want to change the scale of this. So I'm going to make this 0.5. Let's make it even less. Let's go 0.2. All right, so as you can see, we're starting to get something that feels more and more like what I like. And it's not there yet. We still got a little work to do. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to turn off my following tag, not necessary for this case. In the actual displacement itself, we can see we're using a 4K displacement texture here, and this level of detail is set to 256 by 256. So I'm going to increase this to 4K. And that way we get just like better detail. You probably can't see it from where you're sitting. I can see it up here, though. It was very jagged and kind of pixelated on the edges. So we want that kind of be smoothed out. Let's go into our light, and let's increase the brightness, the overall power of this. 5 might be too much, but now you can see that the direction in which that light is pointing is going to make a great deal of difference. I might go into this material as well and change the overall scale. You could go in and make a transform node for all of them and drop the scale down, but this is probably just easier for this point. So I'm going to just say 80 and kind of scale that down. I'm going to go into this camera here too. I'm going to increase this aperture. I really want to have this crazy kind of drop off here. And let's go back into our material again, right? It's just going to be a lot of back and forth until we really dial this in and get this right, which is why if you do this technique, don't just give up on it easy. It's really about getting in there and looking at it and kind of like going in with a fine comb and figuring out how to transform these details. I'm probably going to scale this down maybe 0.15. I want it to get a little bit smaller, so we get a little bit more of that granular level detail. And I'm also going to reduce the amount that this is being displaced here. Let's reduce it by 50%. All right, cool. So we're starting to get there again, right? I don't like how brown this is still. So I'm going to come into the color correction node, and let's say saturation 0.25. Let's increase the gamma to 1.8. Just make it a little bit darker overall. I'm also going to throw another plane in here. And I do this a lot in my work, too. It just kind of helps break up that repetition again. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this material. I'm just going to throw in a specular material for now. You could give this kind of like a bluish tint or tone to it, or add a little bit of subsurface. Right now it's picking up the sky reflection, so it kind of works. It gives it this kind of a feel that it's like water or puddle or something like that. Let's take a look into this displacement. And let's see what it will look like if I just reduce this overall height of this displacement. Again, if that's going to look good or not. Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I think I probably want the overall scale of the displacement a little bit smaller if I can. So let's do that. Let's go into the transform node. Let's just make it 0.1. So I really want to get that granular level detail. The other thing I'm looking at is the actual diffuse texture itself. I think the scale of this is just a little bit too big for my taste. And really, you can see these light and dark areas of that material, of just what the image was. I kind of want them to just be a little smaller. It's going to give it the feel that that it's a lot more like macro texture. So I'm going to put a transform node on that, and I'm just going to reduce this by 0.5. And you're going to see the little spots here now have become smaller. We can do something maybe like 0.3 instead, right? It's getting smaller and smaller. And this now, like, I'm getting very happy with this. Now this is looking a lot more like these kind of references that I was showing you. So we're not done yet, though. We've got more. So remember that rock we sculpted way back when? We're going to go look at this now. And this is where I was talking about in the beginning of my presentation of making things more photorealistic, and it's about layering. If you're just satisfied with this, that's great. It's a good look. But if you want to then take it to the next level, this is where this comes into play. I'm going to go back in. I'm going to open up a couple of my original files so we can actually take a look at this technique again. Because remember I said this technique is exactly what we're doing today. It's going to give us a totally different look. All these pieces of sand, we're going to do that with rocks, but not this many. So if you can kind of use your imagination and think, okay, Hallie's doing the rocks, I can make sand like this, that detailed using the same techniques. So there's a lot of different techniques that you guys can do to achieve this. So let's go into that nice, beautiful little rock that we sculpted. So I'm going to right-click it and say current state to object, and I'm just going to copy this rock over and paste it into our scene. You can see that it is rather large. That's no problem. We're going to just scale it down, and we're going to be messing with the scale a whole heck of a lot. And I'm going to right-click on, this is our actual ground. I should just label this here, why not? So this is our ground. I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm going to say current state to object. And I'm going to use this piece of geometry to clone onto. So I'm going to just select some of these planes here. So let me just increase this brush. So I'm going to select some of these planes, and this is where I'm going to clone rocks onto. Probably not going to go back a whole lot further. It's just really not necessary. Cool. That's good for now. And I'm going to select the invert of this, and I am going to delete. So now all we have is the section area that I want to clone onto that surface. Now, this is one annoying thing that happens, right? You guys have had this where you delete the points, now you got, or delete the faces, and now you have all these extra points that have no geometry to them. Well, fortunately, in R20, this is no longer going to happen to you. It does it by default now, which is fantastic. It's just kind of one of those redundant things. So when you delete the faces, you have all these extra points. If I'm going to hit U to bring up our quick command here, and then I'm going to hit O for optimize, you can see now we got rid of all those extra points. That's something that you're no longer going to have to do in R20 when you grab that. All right, so I'm going to hide this ground. We don't need it to be seen in our visual at all. And I'm going to get an Octane scatter. And again, if you remember from the beginning of the presentation, you no longer need this now, this scatter tool. It was really good because Octane scatter was so much more powerful than anything else on the market. But with the release of R20, it has the multi-instance feature within the cloner object, and it gives you the same functionality. You'll have to ask someone way smarter than me about how that works behind the scenes, but it does do the same thing, and it works really amazing. All right, so I've got my rock here. Let's label this. And I'm going to make that a child of my Octane scatter. And I'm going to change it to surface, and I'm going to drag and drop my ground surface in there. Let's just see what this looks like. It's going to look kind of chaotic, and the scale of the rocks is not going to be there yet, but we're going to add some variation to this in a second. We're going to change the scale of them. All right, cool. Not there yet, like I said. So instead of doing this, we're going to, I'm probably going to go into the scale, into Octane scatter, and I'm going to reduce the scale. I'm going to say 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. They're all going to kind of shrink up a little bit. That's fine. I'm going to do a couple different layers of this. Now I want to go and say MoGraph, effector, random effector. And you can use different effectors in the Octane scatter just like you can do with the cloner object. And then I'm going to drag and drop the random effector in here. I don't want to move the position, though. Not via here, not randomly in the position. But I do want to transform the scale. So let's say like negative 0.8 or something like that. And so I'm going to just start adding variation to these pieces. Then I'm going to change the rotation. Let's just crank this up, because I just want them to be very varied and have a whole lot of differences. I definitely want these to be smaller than they are right now. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, let's make this 0.2, the scale everywhere, right? And you can see they're really kind of intersecting in the geometry right now. I do want to lift them all up. And if I go into the position and I increase the Y direction here, we can see that they're all going to start raising up. Now, I don't want them to be floating, so you got to find some kind of in-between. I think that works pretty well. I'm going to use the same texture that we used to make the ground, but I want these extra stones that are sitting on top to have a different color to them, a slightly different tone. So I'm going to open this guy up. I go into my node editor, and I actually want these, I'm going to make these a little bit brighter. So I'm going to bring this to like maybe 1.2 or something like that. And I probably am going to take off the displacement. I don't think it's going to be necessary for the stones. They're at such a small detail. We might turn it back on. Let's take a look. So, okay, so now you can see that they're kind of popping out a little bit more. I'm going to reduce these even more because I have so many of them. So, again, it's all about the layers. So I want to have more layers to these. So I'm going to go into this Octane scatter here, and I'm going to change this to 0.15 maybe, 0.15 all across the board. Whoa, what did I do? Oh, 1.5. No, 0.15. And 0.15. Perfect. Okay, so now we're getting that kind of smaller detail, right? So now we've got the granular level detail with the displacement that's on the material on the rock, and then we're adding smaller pebbles on top of the material on the actual ground surface, and we're going to do one more layer of this. So I'm going to copy this scatter, and I'm going to change the seed up, just like that. I'm going to reduce the amount that we have, maybe to something like 50. I don't know. We'll come back in and tweak this, and I'm going to increase the scale. So let's make the scale 0.5. Let's go a little bit lower. Let's go 0.3. Right? And you can kind of keep doing this, and we can kind of change that material and that texture again. And more now, it's like we are getting a pretty cool look. You can throw a couple different variations on here, right? I can copy this material down here and open this guy up, and we can say, hey, maybe one of these, we want to bring in a little bit more of that kind of brown tone back in, because remember, I kind of really dropped the saturation, but maybe we want to have more of a warm tone to a couple of those stones, and so I can copy and paste this Octane scatter again, maybe make this, we'll just keep it 50, but I'm going to change the seed so they're not right on top of each other. Let's throw that material on there, and let's increase it. So let's go 200, just so there's a lot more, and let's go 0.2, 0.2, and 0.2 for the scale. And so it's all about having that variation mixed in. So this is really limitless with what you can do with this, guys. You can make sand very like the Pixar film, the short film Piper, right? That's, if you see their breakdown, that's just pretty much what they're doing, right? And so you just translate it from one thing to the next. And they put a lot of science and math behind how they were doing it. And so that's really how I go through and make all my different ground materials. Let me pull this last slide up here, right? This is what I was just talking about if you just joined. So same exact technique that we did to make this kind of more like space, rocky dirt terrain thing. It's the same exact thing that I'm doing to make this beach scene. So you can apply this effect to multiple different things, and that is it, guys. So I want to thank Maxon again for having me here and presenting. Thank you guys for showing up. Hello, online people. Thank you for coming. Hello, Brittany. That's my wife. I'll get points for that one. And that's it. So I really appreciate it, guys. You can find me at lockedandloading.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter at lockedandloading. And I appreciate it, and thank you. So cool. Thanks, guys.